why we should stop thinking about long-term player development and focus on the present. Welcome, as always, to mytenniscoaching.com and here on YouTube at My Tennis Coaching. I hope you're all well. And yeah, I've been thinking a lot recently about long-term player development, and it keeps coming up in different texts, different situations, different projects that I'm sort of looking at. And if you're not familiar with long-term player development, it was around in the early 2000s, just when I started coaching, funny enough. And it was this bit of research and a bit of a project to show the journey of a player. From mini to maxi was one slogan I vaguely remember. And it was about different windows of opportunity. So at different ages and stages, players should develop different type of skills. And you had sort of learning the fundamentals at under 10, learning to train, learning to compete. And you had this big, thick document of, okay, under 10s, these are the key skills to get right at this stage. And then at under 12s, under 14s, 16s, 18s. And the idea was you take the player through these stages, you tick off all these boxes, and at the end of the day, you'll have a tennis player. And I bought into it, hook, line and sinker back in the day. And a lot of my coaching, especially for the first 20 years, was based on that model, based on that concept of, okay, let's teach these players these key skills that they need for this stage. And I spoke a lot about the importance of these windows of opportunity. And looking back on that stuff this week and through a few conversations with different coaches, it's highly flawed, because again, tennis is not linear. Human growth is not linear. Human development's not linear. Learning's not linear. Yet we have these frameworks in place, and there's still elements of that framework, even though it's not as popular as it once was in the early 2000s. You only have to look at your tennis notice board and you'll see ideas and concepts from long-term player development, such as in your junior program. Your red, orange, green program is very much based on some of that research and some of that evidence at the time in terms of, well, this is a player journey and a player pathway. Where it breaks down is we can't predict human growth. We can't predict where the player is going to be in 2 weeks, never mind 2 years. We definitely can't predict where the player is going to be in 10 years. And we could also have 2 8-year-olds who are twins, and I coach a couple of twins as well, and they're both completely different physically, psychologically. Their personality is completely different, even though they're twins. They share a lot of similar characteristics. They are both individuals, and even identical twins. Again, I coach 2 identical twins, and they are a little bit different. For example, one's a left-hander, one's a right-hander, and no 2 people are the same. Yet we have this program, this research to show, well, at under 10 you should develop this, under 8, under 9, under 10s, and these are key skills to develop. And if you do all these things, you have a play at the end. And if you have 2 8-year-olds who are completely different, that doesn't work. And I've seen that quite a lot this week with 2 examples of a 9-year-old going onto an orange court and completely struggling. Why? Because they had the physicality of a 6-year-old. They weren't very tall, they weren't very athletic, and if you compare them to the 6-year-olds in the red group, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. But biologically, he's 2 years older. And then you're also seeing it with one of my other players, and who's very tall, very athletic, and put him on an orange court, and he plays what you probably consider really good tennis. Stick him on a red court, which is the age and stage that he should be on, and it completely breaks down because he's too tall, he's too strong for that red court. And it really got me thinking about how dangerous this stuff is, because we just have this notion of, well, if we follow this plan, we'll get a player at the end. And it's funny because most tennis goal setting, when you sit down with your players and plan out your goals, one of the things I used to say to lots of my players is, well, it's not going to be straightforward. It's not going to be a straight line. There's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be twists and turns, and that's just life. Life gets in the way. But then we have these player programs and we have these long-term player development programs where it's very linear. And you only move forwards in these programs. You don't move backwards. You don't move sideways. You don't sidestep. And if you look at any long-term player development program, and you just have to Google it. I know Tennis Canada have still got their stuff online on this. and it's still used today by a lot of academies and coaches, and it just makes no sense. And I think people like having a safety net. They like to believe that they're following something that works, and there's no evidence out there that this stuff actually works. There's no evidence to suggest that really focusing on these key skills at these times work. And like most goal setting within tennis coaching, academies, programs will set these type of programs up, and they'll never follow them through. Because why? Because when you have this pre-written program and you take it on court and you deliver it to real living, breathing humans, living, breathing humans will not comply with the black and white paper, because they're not robots. They are adaptable, versatile, sometimes challenging organisms. And it breaks down. So what happens when it breaks down? You adapt your plan, you change it, and then you almost divert away from the linear long-term athlete development program, and you end up going what's probably the best way to tailor and cater towards your athletes. And then what happens though sometimes is when you don't see the success is then you think, yeah, it's because I didn't stick to long-term development plan. And it's, if only tennis was that simple. And I think rather than looking at the future, and I think that happens a lot with tennis coaches, we look so far into the future. I've got to teach the split step today. Why? Because they need it when they're going to play on a bigger court. Okay. I need to teach them a C-shaped forehand. Why? They need it when they play on the bigger court. Okay. But they're not playing on a bigger court. They're playing on a smaller court. So why not teach them skills that they need today? And this whole notion of they need is a crazy one for me, because chances are, because the coaching's not very good, they won't be playing tennis in 2 years. So you're almost future-proofing a player that won't be playing the game. And it gets worse than that, because a lot of the development or the techniques that the coaches are using, it's with an eye on the professional game, which they're never going to get to. So you're teaching these movements and techniques to players who might not be playing the game in a couple of years because your coaching is not very good, and they're definitely not going to be professional tennis players. So rather than look at long-term development, why don't we just look at here and now? What are the wants and needs of the players today? And that might just be to have fun, and that's okay. Like, if players come to your lessons to have fun, that's absolutely fine, because I guarantee if they're having fun, they're going to be playing in 2 years. And when it comes to movement skill and stuff like that, they just play the game. Humans interact with the task at hand, and they modify their movement to try and perform the task really well. I think sometimes we overcomplicate the human body, and we try and put in these complicated movement solutions into organisms where they don't need it. Like, you don't need to split step at red because the court's so small and the ball's so slow. You don't need to have a huge loopy forehand at red. Why? Because the ball's so slow and the court's so small. So at red, you probably just need to get the ball back and try and find space. And that might not look pretty. It might look like they're jabbing the ball around and stuff, but that's okay. Because if they get really good at that, when they go to orange, they'll then adapt to the quicker ball and bigger court. We don't have to teach them more complex skills because they go to orange. We don't have to keep teaching them more complex skills because they go to green. The court and the ball make it more complex anyway. And the player themselves, they'll just self-organise and they will find a solution. And each player will find their own unique solution. And that's, in my opinion, a more beneficial way of coaching, rather than me trying to coach this framework onto players who probably don't need it. They definitely don't want it, and it might not be in their best interest anyway. And I just think our coaching is so backwards in terms of how we look at it. We look at the pro game and then we try to work our way backwards. Okay, well, what did Federer do when he was 8? Okay, and what did that look like? And if we copy that, then we probably get the same success. We try and reverse engineer rather than looking at the person in front of you, an 8-year-old, what they have physically and psychologically in that moment, and making the best of what we have today. That's going to keep kids in the game. That's going to develop players longer term. these long-term plans and programs, and you only have to go on any national governing body's website and there's plans and pathways, and it's just a load of rubbish, because no one actually knows what's going to happen tomorrow with a player, never mind 2 years, 5 years, 6 years. No one knows how many matches you should play per year. No one knows how many hours of coaching you should have, because it's so unique and it's so different to every single player. I've done podcasts on this before. You can't just copy the national #1 players program. You can't just copy their pathway and think you can replicate it into your program. It's not that simple. You probably might have to do less. You might have to do more. Again, it depends on the unique characteristics of the player from a psychological and physical point of view. So there you go. Let me know, as always, in the comments what you think. Please share this with your tennis coaches, tennis parents, tennis players. The more you share it, the more ears I get into, and hopefully the more people I can get to rethink their tennis coaching. And until next time, check out mytenniscoaching.com, and I'll see you soon.